I wrote this play in 1988, so long before September 11th, and long before suicide bombing and terrorism were part of our day-to-day lives. And I wrote the play because I was thinking about suicide, but also, kind of oddly, I read a newspaper article, the New York Times, that reported that there was an advertisement, a help-wanted ad in a foreign newspaper that advertised for a grenade attack, a grenade attacker and a suicide bomber, and they were willing to pay $75,000 for a suicide bomber. And so that was the inspiration for this play.
Terrorism seems to be a mechanism which functions based on individuals who've reached a certain personal place in their life and feed on that. So in Vic, I tried to, create or imagine somebody that has an optimism about one final act in life, that the overall grind and size of life has left him feeling like, this is probably it, this is probably the best I'm going to do. And I tried to sort of steer it away from what we might imagine the stereotypical image of somebody who's cause-oriented, angry, or has a real purpose. Certainly that happens on occasion with terrorists, but I think a lot of times the people that are asked to do this are essentially manipulated, and manipulated because they're just in a really hard place personally, where they've kind of bottomed out and they're given one venue to speak out to the world one last time. A terrorist or a suicide bomber in particular is driven to some end and has to convince themselves of this logic, but that there's got to be that moment of clarity beforehand. And yet, what I love about the play, too, is it suggests that perhaps by that point it's too late, that the organization, the people around them have put them in a position where they really can't get out. And so that while we imagine them as these, evil people that are just evil from the beginning, evil all the way through, I like the idea that they're people who had dark days, and that, perhaps even along the way sort of have a little bit of light about what's happening, but then can't do anything. Odd to imagine falling in love on the day that somebody would also plan to kill themselves. And I think one of the things is, from the outside, I like the idea that it's possibly manipulation, that, again, these souls are in a place, and you'll notice like a lot of the other people at the agency are women that in some way or another have a pull on him, and this could be one. But from Vic's point of view, I think it's a genuine love, and I like the idea that perhaps it comes from the very fact that today is the day he's taken action, and that the sort of irony is that he's finally like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something. And in doing that, perhaps creates a little bit of attraction from her, perhaps has a little more confidence that he would, perhaps finds himself in a place, and certainly he's finally outside of his doubts and fears about what he's going to do with his life. And then, I sort of like the fantastical quality of whenever it happens, that it would happen then at the too late moment that he'd then have to deal with.
Well, I think that Daisy is sincere, and I don't know how much it matters to say this, but I think that Vic is special to her. That's my approach. Because if she does this with everybody all the time and it's just another dupe, then who cares, He imagines things.
I think there is a level of purposeful ambiguity in the play now. I think there's definitely a level at which that question is left open to the audience.
Yeah.
I think she portrays it some as real love. He calls out obvious facts that could suggest otherwise. It'd be easy to imagine that it's not real, but it also could be seen. I think that's sort of intentional to wonder. Vic is the suicide bomber and the organization in general. I actually think it's a very important part of the play that it is specifically non-political. I think the mistake we, in America, have made is allowed it to become a political thing. It's become almost partisan, and it's become very much about our Iraq policy. It's become very much about how we see the Judeo-Christian world versus the Muslim world. And I think the reason we need to see it as apolitical is we tend to have a very naive view in America that we found terrorism and discovered it relatively recently. And terrorism is time eternal and not really new or really that interesting at all. It's a form of warfare that's been going on. It happened in America, the Native American and the U.S. Army. It's happened in South America in the 60s in massive ways, obviously in the Middle East and everywhere. And the more I think we come to see that terrorism, like I think maybe you're suggesting, is a political act often by an oppressed minority, but that's what it is. It's a political act by an oppressed minority who wants to engage in war in the only way they can. I think then we'll get away from drawing such political lines and can start viewing it as an entity that is not bound by nationalism and is not bound by party, that we're going to have to deal with terrorism no matter what, and that it's a mistake to start to feel like, oh, it's just us against them, because it will always be there as long as there's a minority.
There is a piece of me that sees them from a compassionate point of view, and that they're really victims, but I still take sides. I think they're victims of their own culture and their own leaderships, more than they're victims of our imperialist ways. I'm not saying that our imperialist ways don't have a part, but not as much as what's being done in their own house. I think it's very damaging to look at them as less than human, because doing so doesn't deal with the problem at hand. And there are, as Dr. Mack was saying, they're coming from very educated background now, med students and people from well-to-do families, where it's become fashionable, and it's become a problem where we just can't look at it as something happening on the other side of the ocean. And when I was dealing with terrorists, it wasn't on a social basis, and it wasn't on a helping basis. I mean, it was literally I was against them. And it was clear-cut and dry. This side was Lebanon, this side was Israel, behind me were settlements. Not controversial settlements like West Bank settlements, actually left-wing settlements. And we used to intercept them on the way to their missions. And at that point, they was pretty much exploiting the most down and out, both from extreme poverty and just a total despair. I mean, when we caught them, they just weren't in this world. So you can really curse more, not the individual terrorists, but those who are programming them and deploying them. That's where my opinion is, where I would put the evil label. Actually, in that society, they don't have to go to such extents, although I'm sure they do some of that. When I was a soldier, we were getting the names of the suicide bombers through intelligence, and we were also found out that they had a school for them, and so we used to laugh amongst ourselves what the final exam must have been in this school. Yet, as time went on, it's become a fixture of the culture, and plus, in a society where there's no democracy, it's a very different world outlook, and a society where you don't have free choice. You don't need to, all those things that you mentioned that were set up with the Moonies and whatnot are much more in place. And there's almost peer pressure, like around Ramallah you see murals of all the martyrs that died, and you see 6-year-old kids playing suicide bomber, where a bunch of kids will gather and one kid would run in between them and scream Allahu Akbar, and blow himself up. And it's really become a goal of the day, like becoming an NBA player is a goal in this society. Now, what blew my mind was just 1 week of democracy, and 1 week of choice really changed all that as if overnight. You know, once the people saw that they can express what they truly felt and be safe expressing it, how it worked out. Now, we'll go out and read a newspaper headline that will make a mockery of everything I said, but yeah, I think that those controls, to answer your question, those controls are just built into that society.
Vic is somebody who's suicidal. He would like for his suicide to either have an impact or give himself some financial gain, you know, some sort of bonus, and you know, sort of a crass way that perhaps his suicide can be more than just eliminating himself from the world. And if that's true, and he truly doesn't believe that these are people worthy of living, then I don't think he has a qualm with it. And that's why, again, I think it's such an important question to ask ourselves, like, are we at a point where we're starting to produce people on our side or their side, whatever the side, who really don't care at all about the other people, who don't even see them particularly as targets, but can easily dismiss them as just casualties of what's going on in terrorism, and that they're, you know, I'm just playing my part, but they're going to die anyway. This terrorism happens all the time.
Certainly, I view the play not as a depiction of a world that we know, but you know, call it a cautionary fable in the sense of, you know, when things get worse, or as they get worse, you know, will they get, you know, like this? You know, will the desire to become a suicide bomber, or the opportunity to become a suicide bomber, be so commonplace that it will be something that people do, in Vic's case, almost out of boredom. You know, like, what else, you know, I don't know what else to do with my life today. Oh, I know, I can, you know, I'll go around the corner and apply to be a suicide bomber. And I think if the point that makes is that, you know, what a horrifying world will we live in when this happens, and are we getting closer to that world?
Yeah, in fact, sorry to ramble on with this, but I think, you know, a lot of the school killings we've seen with kids in schools who take people out, a lot of those have been viewed as an expression of, like, you know, they're sort of done and they want a final statement, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, and obviously there's been some emulation of that act. And so I think that those two worlds are sort of merging, like, you know, because what exactly is the difference between a child shooting other people in a terrorist act if you take away the politics? It becomes anybody now who's in a place where they don't care anymore, it starts to be like, oh, well, that, I see, that's one way to go.
You know, the Columbinization of terrorism, exactly. Yeah, that's a very